Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March meeting of Corporate ONS. Before I start, I'll remind everyone that this meeting will be broadcast live and will be available for all residents to access to understand the work of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'll start with agenda item number 1, which is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies tonight?
Nope, none tonight, Councillor.
Thanks, Lucy. Very good to see a full house in attendance. I'll move on then to item number 2, which is minutes. Are there any comments on the minutes that any member would like to make? Councillor Rice.
It's coming. Yes, Chair. On page 14, in the draft capital programmes, and it comes in page 14-15, where I asked a question about the railway interchange project at Stamford, and Sean did say that he would get something to us in writing, but I've never received it. He said he'd send it round to all the committee.
Thanks, Councillor Rice. Sean, I think you wanted to come in on that one.
Chair, yeah, I need to give my apologies. That's an outstanding action for me. I will ensure I do it tomorrow.
Well done. Good.
Thanks, Sean, and thank you, Councillor Rice, for raising. Any other items from the minutes anyone would like to raise? No. Are we all happy to agree those minutes then?
Agreed.
Yep. Thank you very much. I see. Agreed. Thank you very much. Those are agreed. I'll move on to item 3, which is items of urgent business, and I haven't been notified of any items of urgent business this evening. I'll move on then to item 4, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? No, I'm not seeing any member indicate. No, thank you. So we'll move on to item number 5, the Memorandum of Understanding on Local Government. I'm very grateful to Councillor Gledhill for attending this evening to present this item. Rob, it's over to you. Please take as much time as you want to present.
Oh, excuse me, and thank you, Chair. Apologies, my internet connection is absolutely appalling this evening. I've already lost connections twice. If I disappear, I'll probably reappear halfway through a sentence, for which I apologise. Just ask if there's anything missing. Basically, as I pointed out, I brought to everyone's attention at the last Cabinet meeting, the intention is to sign a Memorandum of Understanding with Basildon Council in relation to the up-and-coming local government reorganisation. Something that we found last year in between lockdowns, the government, sticking close to its manifesto commitments, is looking at local government reform and the evolution of powers down to local areas. As part of that, I think it was in September, there was a move to see which areas were suitable for trial areas. This was a national call, and I believe only 3 sites were actually decided on. The reason for that being is it had to have consent from everybody. Now there is, as I understand, the drive will be a majority of consent amongst the local authorities. I'm not going to go into the speculations why I feel that is the case, but the facts remain that local government reform is likely to happen in the coming year, if not the year after, and Thurrock needs to be prepared for this. As we know, Thurrock's been a unitary local authority since 1998, which means it's responsible for all of its income and expenditure, which, quite frankly, in 1998, I thought was an odd thing to do as a local government officer. Now, and probably since about 2000, it's quite clear that being a unitary authority was the right thing to do, not just for Thurrock, indeed, probably for much larger areas across the country. And my understanding is that part of local government reform will look to expand the sizes and introduce new unitary authorities. One of the problems experienced, and irrespective of political party and administration, is the legacy of 1999, with odd issues, shall we say. And I shall use the Tilbury Ferry as a good example. £40,000 expenditure on either side from each local authority, that's Thurrock and Kent County Council. For Thurrock, it's about a third of our supported transport services budget. For Kent, it's £40,000 out of several million. So the percentile is just completely off. But of course, it's the residents of Thurrock at the moment, actually businesses that are picking up that tab. But ultimately, it's been the residents of Thurrock that have had to do so. So before we go into any kind of local government reform, it'd be wise to look to see those we're joining to understand what their true position is. Now, as a Tier 1 authority, as a unitary authority, we are responsible for things like adult social care, children's social care, which in our case, and indeed pretty much every local authority's case, is the largest expenditure we have. So should we look to expand, whether it be with Basildon or with Basildon and others, or whether that be forced on us from a proposition from elsewhere, perhaps from Essex or perhaps even from central government itself, although that's unlikely, the second part, then we wouldn't want to go into this blind. So in discussions with the leader at Basildon, we feel it's the right thing to do to explore what will be the benefits and indeed what will be the pitfalls, if there are any, of becoming a larger unitary authority. So ignore the titles of Thurrock Council and Basildon Council, but being a homogenous unitary authority irrespective of its name. But we'll just call it Basildon and Thurrock for an example. Now that would be an approximate, it'd be just over doubling in size of resident capacity. There'll be a significant number of new business rates opportunities and business rates income that would come to the new unitary authority. But equally, and more importantly, I think there would be a huge expense that currently isn't directly spent by Basildon. And I'll get back to the adult children's social care as the examples. At the moment, Basildon has a precept which is significant, that is paid by all of the residents of Basildon and is paid off to Essex County Council, and then for Essex County Council to use that money to deliver its services that it needs to deliver across the whole of Essex, including back down to Basildon. Now, obviously, we have no idea at this time how much that spend is, and indeed how much that would actually cost should it be should we become one larger authority. I'm just focusing on those two as examples, not just those two items we'd need to look at. So part of this memorandum of understanding would be to look at all the aspects of becoming a larger Tier 1 unitary authority and what that would actually mean. So if we just think about just some basics, we'll talk about grass cutting. So we now obviously have a good grass cutting service. Basildon have a good grass cutting service. There will be the same amount of grass to cut should we merge. So there would be likely, the cost is going to be about the same of what they spend and what we spend. There might be slight differences, but a de minimis amount. But obviously, the amount of money that is passed up to Essex would remain with the new council if the council were to remain the same. And that would have to cover the extra cost for all the extra Tier 1 services, so adult social care, children's social care, strategic highways, strategic planning, waste disposal. There was a massive list. I'm not going to go into all of them. And that's what this memorandum of understanding really encompasses. It is solely to look at what are the benefits, what are the pitfalls, what would be the cost, and what would be ultimately, is there a benefit, and is there not just a benefit for residents in the form of council tax, would there be a benefit for residents in all the services that are in the two local authorities, bus routes, strategic highway, strategic transport connectivity, and so on and so on and so on. Basildon is looking, and I believe it's actually on our papers next week as the seller for a new academy, which is being backed by Ford for a training academy, which is absolutely fantastic. I'm not going to say for Basildon, It's absolutely fantastic for the south of Essex. Now, if you can imagine, if we were a large authority, there would obviously be that as one of those things within this new large authority. That's a bonus. Negatives, again, probably the massive increase in adult social care and children's social care, not necessarily a negative, but it's an unknown. So this is all about exploring all of those unknown unknowns, all of those known unknowns, and indeed all of those known knowns. So, you know, this is a real opportunity to see what would be the benefits now, not what was the benefits 30 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, what they are now, because both Thurrock and Basildon have evolved since we've become a unitary authority. So trying to compare what we did now to what we did 22 years ago when we went unitary, or probably 24 years ago when the process started, it's a completely different kettle of fish. So, you know, we do need to go, I wouldn't want to go into local government reform completely blind and say, yes, the best thing for Thurrock would be to join with X and Y or X, Y, Z and whomever, without the knowledge of what that impact would be. What we don't want to end up with is, as we've seen elsewhere in the country, in other unitarisations or expansions, is things that have been missed. So adult social care budget is being £6, £7, £8, £9 million under budgeted, and then for that to be added to the council tax over a period of time just to break even, as it were, rather than actually getting the right amount of money from the residents in the first place. So this isn't, as some people have said, this isn't a merger. This isn't starting a merger now. This is about exploring what are the opportunities, what are the risks, indeed, what would this be the best thing for both authorities? Because it's not just us, it's also Basildon. My understanding is that goes to their relevant committee either tonight or tomorrow night, or certainly this week, and there it will be discussed. I have to say I've had a good number of good meetings with the leader of Basildon, Gavin Callaghan. And not so because he's a Labour leader. He's a Labour leader, so this is nothing political. Both of us understand that, you know, local government needs to evolve, local government needs to reform, and it needs to move forward, irrespective of the pandemic. It's a system that is archaic. Why should you have the situation where a local authority fills a small pothole and the pothole on the other side of a junction needs to be another authority to fill it? Not another council, but another responsibility authority. So it's a you know, comes on to the A13. Well, that part of it's going to have to be filled by Essex. This part's going to have to be filled by Basildon. To me, it seems somewhat alien, and I'm sure to a significant number of Thurrock residents it would seem alien, but that process still exists. So this is about making sure we're informed as we move forward, that if asked and challenged, we can give the proper and right answers to central government. We can show the criteria that moving forward as a local authority, should we expand, would be the right thing in the sense for residents, in the sense for businesses, in the sense that not just Thurrock and Basildon do well out of this, but everybody else around doesn't lose out accordingly. So that pretty much, Chair, is where we are. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you or the committee may have.
Thanks very much, Councillor Gatehill. I have a few myself, and then I'll ask other members to indicate by digitally raising their hand as well. But first of all, I guess what I want to understand here, sort of to begin with, is the kind of the broader context that we're operating in. And clearly you've outlined there some of the changes that are coming down the track that might have an impact in the way that the council operates and the likely sizes that the government looks to unitaries in the future. Are we expecting that on the current setup of the council, that's not likely to be viable any longer in the government's new world?
I can't speak for the government, as you can probably understand, Chair. My understanding from the information that was received last year is that the sizes they're looking for unitaries somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 residents. So the combination of Basildon and Thurrock would just fall into that, the lower end of that criteria. It's not, as I understand, looking to scrap local authorities as they exist at the moment. We're not the smallest unitary, and equally we're not the largest. But again, I cannot speak for government as to if they'll change their mind as to the indications they gave last year to the indications they'll give in the future. So there isn't like but please don't take away from this, there is a rush to do this before we're scrapped. There is no, at this moment in time, plans, as I understand, to scrap authorities as they stand. The concern for me, as I expressed last year, is stuff being done to Thurrock rather than being done with Thurrock. We also have public plans. Essex County Council have published plans, which are a very broad outline. In fairness to the leader of Essex County Council, did hold a full meeting with all of the Essex leaders. Some were quite happy with it, some weren't so happy with it. And rather than just put one option, he did put a number of options forward. But equally, as a unitary authority leader, and as you know yourself, as a leader of the opposition group for a while, we're unitary. We have our own responsibilities. We have our own voice, and it really shouldn't be people dictating to Thurrock what should be done. It should be Thurrock looking to see what the options are for Thurrock and how to expand, if that's what government are asking, in a way that's beneficial not just for Thurrock but for anybody else that we expand out with.
Thank you, Councillor. So as I understand it, then there's no kind of immediate impact on the council if we sort of don't take any action straight away. Is that the same? I mean, I guess from the point of view of the council's sort of outlook over the next over the medium term, so over the next 4 to 5 years, do we think there are kind of, as you say, there is the danger then of something being done to Thurrock if we don't act to get our own house in order?
It's not about having our own house in order. As members be aware, I'm currently the chair of ASLA, the Association of South Essex Local Authorities. We've been working together without any talk of mergers or anything else amongst the 6 local authorities to see how we can best benefit from working together, but at the same time keeping our own sovereignty and our own decision-making processes. But of course, only 2 of those local authorities have got all of the powers for all of their outcomes. The other 4 are reliant on Essex County Council, and I really would, I'd publicly thank Essex County Council for, on the whole, that they're at pretty much every. I think I've had an open discussion quite often with Councillor Finch at Essex, and it's really quite clear, and I wholeheartedly support and agree with his thought that Essex is not a partner in the sense it's a local authority, it's a partner in the sense that it's an overarching authority. So it would be up to them to make the decision as to whether a joint piece of work, just for argument's sake, a cycle path from Southend to Rochford, I'm just plucking things out there, whether that would meet their criteria of why they should spend money from their respective budgets. As we saw last year, pretty much as we started to come out of the first lockdown, there wasn't so much a rush for this to happen. There were suggestions it was going to happen. Then there was quite clear instructions that this is definitely going to happen. It is in line with Conservative Party policy and indeed the manifesto. And then it will start to happen. But, and it was the big but, some trials to start with where there needs to be full consent. Whether that continues, and as I understand that the full consent has changed now to majority consent, and again, it's an understanding from something that may or may not happen, so that could change between now and any announcement by central government. But it certainly looks like reform is going to happen. So rather than being on the back end of it and being in a position where either government or Essex County Council put forward an absolutely fantastic set of plans, government saying, yeah, this is pretty much exactly what we're looking for. Oh, the only people that don't agree is Thurrock, and it's all right for everybody else but Thurrock, then I don't want that to happen. I want us to be in a really strong position to say, actually, Mr. Secretary of State, this is Thurrock's position. This is how we see ourselves. This is what we know would be the impact of if it was just us and Basildon. And this would be the impact not just for us but for the whole of Essex. and we need to be in that strong position. Again, back to hence the paper.
Thank you. And again, for the next question, I think I know the answer to this, but I think it'd be good for members and residents to hear it. But does this memorandum stop us considering any other options for future structures, or indeed deciding to take no action at all?
Absolutely not. And you're quite right to raise that. Had you not, I would have thrown it in somewhere else. No, this memorandum of understanding is for Basildon and Thurrock to officially to start to work together to look at the possibilities. Now, of course, if it looks like there isn't anything that's a benefit for Thurrock or benefit for Basildon, so one for us, thank you very much, then we stop and then we carry on as we are now. And the government say, do you know what, this is going to happen, and I'm not going to say what this will be, but whatever this that they say is going to happen, then we'll need to start working towards that. The government say, actually, we're not going to devolve anything, everyone's going to stay the same. Excuse me, we'll stay the same. But we do need to be prepared, as it's quite clear that, and government have made very clear that local government reform will happen. Okay, it might not happen this summer, it might not happen the summer following, but it may well happen the summer after that. But somewhere in between there, we need to be prepped up, hence the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Cloutiel. In terms of residents and their views and involvement, what would you say is the best way for residents to engage with this process, and how do we make sure that they will have the final say on the future shape of their council?
Again, I can't preempt what government will say in relation to local government reform. I know at the moment there is the part of the reform process is to put this to residents, and again, if we put this to residents now, I'm sure the vast majority, if not all of the residents, would want to say, well, what's in it for me? Not personally, but what's in it for us? What's in it for Thurrock? What would be the benefits? And at the moment, we don't know. So this is just to say that we are looking at this. It's open and transparent. So suddenly you don't get those conspiratorial headlines saying, secret merger between Thurrock and Basildon. Work's undergoing to merge this, to merge that, and everything else. This is clear, open, transparent governance to say, this is what we're doing. It's an exploratory work to find out what the benefits are, what the pitfalls are, and to move forward. So at this time, there would be nothing to comment on because I don't know what the benefits are. I can surmise what the benefits are. I'm not going to share them, but I can surmise what the benefits are. I'm sure that if you spoke to Councillor Callaghan, he could say what he feels that the benefits may well be. But again, we don't know the impact of adult social care. We don't know the impact of children's social care. We don't know the impact of strategic transport and highways. We don't know the impacts of waste disposal and a whole raft of impacts, as well as, well, what would this do for our council tax, the council tax base, or the business rate base, or what would this mean for elected members, for instance? So if you think between the two local authorities, there's about 100 councillors. Would you need 100 councillors for a new authority? I'm going to say probably not. I think you'll probably see that the electoral commission will go probably 65, maybe 70, depending on what the electoral commission would say would be our size. So I say some residents might will see the benefit of 30 fewer councillors as the reasons do it solely. But again, I don't know that level of detail. Nobody knows that level of detail. Hence, we need to find that out. Once we find that out, whatever the plans of central government on how you do it next and what the next stage is, and if that next stage is full resident consultation, then we will do full resident consultation. If it's a full vote that needs to take place, then a full vote will take place. I don't know, and again, I'm not going to second guess what central government will require in a year's, 2 years, 3 years' time.
Yeah, no, I'll take the point in terms of how much we know at this stage in terms of what that might entail and what the kind of the details may be. I guess the point I just want to hammer home on this one is that we, as a council, do try and go above and beyond in terms of involving residents and just try and make sure that they are brought with us on any process that does take place, rather than, again, sort of coming in fairly late in the day.
As I said earlier on in my presentation, the one thing that we don't want is stuff done to Thurrock. Take that as a step down. I don't want stuff without the involvement of the residents of Thurrock. But at the moment, if someone said to me, right, what am I voting on, Rob? What am I discussing? What am I looking at? I would say, well.
Can we screenshot that and use that as a profile pic?
I think we've lost Councillor Gledhill there in a fairly unfortunate moment. Let's just give him a couple of minutes just to get connected again. There we go. Rob, are you back with us?
Oddly enough, I didn't lose connection with you, but I think you lost connection with me. So everybody else, I could see everybody moving and hear what you're saying. I'd love to see it. I should play the tape back to see what pose I was taking. As I say, as soon as there is a position that we can actually discuss this with residents, it'll be at that point that discussions will take place, and in line with what obviously central government will expect. So I wouldn't like to say, we'll do 15 road shows, or we'll do this, or we'll do that. It's about actually, when we get to that point, let's see what we're required to do minimum, and let's see what we would do as what we expect as a minimum. And as you know, we go beyond consultation to ensure that things are done with residents, not done to residents.
Thank you. Last question from me then. Clearly, now sort of, if we take this forward, that's any sort of next steps are subject to sort of practicalities, budget, agreement of residents. But I guess the final thing I'd like to understand from you, Councillor Gledhill, is what your kind of preferred view is, and what your vision is, and where you'd like the council to be over that kind of medium long term position. Do you think it's Basildon that the future of the council lies with, or elsewhere? And again, obviously, that's subject to considerable sort of technical detail work and sort of resident input and so on.
Again, I wouldn't like to say, is this the best move? I'm not saying it's the worst move. Okay, I'll rephrase that and do it from the start. Would merging with Basildon be a good thing? At this moment in time, I couldn't say whether it'd be the best thing or the worst thing. Far from it. I don't think anybody could. Do I feel that a larger Thurrock would benefit? As a former council tax officer, I know that a larger tax base makes it easier for residents to split the costs, especially for certain items where you have some areas that don't need it and other areas that do. So a large tax base is absolutely great, but it's not just about the tax raising and the spending power or anything else for local authority. It's whether or not it works. One of my concerns with what I saw at the beginning of last year with the local government reform ideas was there was no size to a minimum and maximum of a new authority. So effectively, you could go back to, or you could have a unitary size county. So a county, the whole of Essex, just for argument's sake, being one local authority, which would be completely distant. Excuse me. There is and needs to be that local input that has an impact on a local outcome. It's no good having a local authority where you have a voice, but that voice carries no weight because all the money is being spent in, and it doesn't matter where else it's being spent. If it's not being spent where you are, it's being spent elsewhere. So there needs to be that size if we are to expand, or if we are to merge, or if we are to to be reformed into something else that is local enough to be able to deliver locally, for residents to have a local voice and have their say, and for that say to be heard and acted on rather than it just being heard and ignored. If someone said, Rob, it's up to you, what would you prefer to do? I would have to say, well, I'm going to have to sit back and speak to an awful lot of people, because it is 3 local authorities as they are in Essex big enough? Is it too big? Is it too small? I truly don't know. But I think an MOU to start that outline to say this is what we're looking for, I think could be a good template, not just locally for Thurrock and Basildon, but right across the board to see, is there the will, is there the benefits, and rather than having, as we saw with the local government reform when it was announced last year, the unitary council network, the county council network, and the district council network all saying different things and all saying that their version of local authorities was the best, especially when two of them were done by the same organisation, which was a little bit odd. But for that to happen shows that not everybody's right, but someone will be. My personal view: unitaries are the way forward. County are just too large, and if you look at some of the feedback that we had from ASLA when we did one of our tests with residents, when we did one of our soundings on, what do you think South Essex is about, and what's the pluses and the minuses. One of the regular things that came on is no one in Chelmsford listens to us, referring obviously to the county council, which that obviously wasn't for people from Thurrock because they don't have that connection with them. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think Essex County Council do an exceptionally good job in certain circumstances. It's a very big area. It's a very diverse area, and they've got a lot of areas to cover. And I think the fact that starts then becoming everybody saying that no one's listening to us is probably the best reason for local government reform. How far and wide that would be, I think, again, we need more soundings and stuff like this MOU is probably the way forward.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll let some other members come in and ask some questions now. So we'll start with Councillor Duffin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, my main point is, hey, information is power. At the end of the day, that's what we need to know. And this makes sense because this change could be a disaster. It could be amazing. All changes obviously come with ups and downs. We know that whatever change you make in life, there's always positives and negatives. It's about finding out what that is and getting that information. Also the idea that status quo is what many people go to. You heard it, whether it's the Brexit referendum, whether it's something else, the status quo, just leave it at that. Regularly, the status quo isn't always on the table. Things change. The responsibilities of unitary councils in 10 years' time will be different than they are today. And that is just the reality of life. That's nothing to do with politics. That's to do with everything. Just saying, hey, sit here, we'll stay where we are and we won't move anything, is just not how it works. So all of that will probably come out in the study. For me, unitaries is the best way. Quite frankly, I would love to abolish every level of government that's not one national, one unitary, and just give people, wherever they are in the UK, the same level of power and sort of responsibility. It just makes everything much more effective. And I think it's finding out that information. Hey, there's probably officers that are doing very similar things across two unitaries. Almost there could be less certain levels of management and more people on the ground doing the job and getting that support they need. So I think there's loads that we can do, and obviously less councillors is another one. It's a saving, and it doesn't mean, hey, that saving we can take council tax down. It could mean we put that money into better roads. We could put that money into something else. So no, I think this is a really good opportunity to look at, hey, what are all the different options out there? And yeah, with every change, and it's probably worth including in there, I don't know if it is going to be in there, might be something on Rob, is what does the status quo look like? And do we know certain stuff's coming down the road? Because many people will be like, oh, it's option change to this or it's changed to that. And they'll forget that actually the status quo isn't, everything will stay the same. So maybe adding that in, if that is a possibility, to look at what is coming down the road.
Thanks. Councillor Clayton?
Thank you, Chair. Oddly enough, one of the questions is, what is the status quo? Now, I've been a councillor for 15 years. And in that time, what has changed for unitaries? Well, we've got public health. Who would have thought, a number of 5 years ago, why put public health in local authorities? What good is that going to do? Well, we just had a pandemic, the first in 100 years, and please be it the last ever. But public health in local authorities, in tier 1 local authorities, certainly for Thurrock, was absolutely brilliant. We knew exactly what was happening, where it was happening, and everything else in Thurrock. That was a devolved power. And part of the local government reform is also devolvement of power. And the last thing you want is 400 and something odd little local authorities bickering and arguing over small amounts of money for us to do a bit of the A13, for Basden to do a bit of the A13, for Castle Point to do a bit of the A13, and so on and so on and so on and so on down the line. You're going to want someone with that voice. And, as we've seen with the metropolitan districts and the new mayoral authorities, they've got power, they've got devolved responsibilities, and that played out massively, not only during the pandemic but before. And when it comes to bidding for money, as we all know, and I keep on mentioning at full council, normally at the budget time, when it comes to getting money from government, there's a formula, and then poor Sean and his crew are there trying to work out how they can get all that money from Thurrock. From central government to help out Thurrock. Well, obviously, having a wider base and having a bigger voice, shall we say, means it actually makes it more coherent for central government to say, actually, do you know what? The south of Essex needs this for this reason. The north of Essex need this for this reason. The south of Bedfordshire needs something, or whatever the new construct would be, because it makes more sense rather than Essex County Council with that very difficult job of saying, actually, I'm probably only going to get about 2 billion or whatever much from government. Where do I put that 2 billion to maximise its effect in Essex? I'm going to have to stick it, and it doesn't matter where they stick it, it's going to be wrong for everybody else. So again, the status quo is things like that. Changing would be a lot more of a devolved power to local authorities to say, actually, we need this for this road expansion, for that rail network expansion, for us to be able to put a tram network in, for us to be able to do whatever the process is.
Thanks, Rob. I'll go over to Councillor Ralph next.
Thank you, Chair. You just hit one of my questions at the end there, Rob, about tram networks and the possibility of more transport links coming up. I'm not going to be naive. I will say that obviously the fears for local residents will be that money's going to end up being spent on the east side of the Thurrock and Basden split. You may have a nice road junction being built in Cranes Farm Road while Hog Lane's falling apart. It'd be that finding that equality and make sure everything's going on. And I think that's why that this memorandum needs to be sort of agreed to, so we know those boundaries, know what the context of what this could mean for our residents. So when they do ask us questions, we can actually give them some answers to know something to answer them with. Just looking forward a little bit further, if this was to happen, do we know, or something you're going to be discussing, on the house building and the growth and regeneration of areas? What I think people will fear is that Thurrock will be seen the place to grow all the homes while all the other stuff is being nicely kept in Basildon. And keeping in terms that we do see that we have got, Thurrock could be seen as a nice little juicy cherry at the moment due to the Freeport. And I do fear that people like Essex County Council could see that as a great development to have within themselves. So when it comes down to picking our options, if we are forced down one route, the more localism sort of side of it, having Basildon and Thurrock joined together is a more favourable choice for myself. But I guess some of these questions are not going to be answered until we do the memorandum and look into it and find these answers.
Rob?
Thanks, Chair. I can nearly guarantee whenever the question of merging or local government reform comes up, there will be a councillor or a group of councillors or a group of residents that will say, this is terrible. It means all of the houses for this particular new group will all be built on my doorstep. Now, you don't need to merge for that. You could pretty much get that from most local authorities when it comes to house building. And as we know, we've got quite a large number of houses to build in Thurrock. So we're looking somewhere in the region of about 30,000. and they're going to have to go somewhere. And you know, everybody, and rightly so, is very worried about their community. And I'm not saying it's wrong. Everybody's worried about their community. You know, I worry about, you know, where I live and access to sites and everything else. Everybody else has got legitimate concerns, and equally there'll be people out there saying this is the best place to build it. That will always happen. You will, if, and it's a big if, and I can't say if often enough on this one, but if this were to happen, there would still be a planning regime. There would still be a local plan regime, albeit bigger. There will still be consultation into where it goes. Now, I'll be brutally honest with you. I know Basildon, okay. I wouldn't be able to tell you where the wall boundaries are. I've gone out and I've helped there for elections. But beyond that, I can tell you like some of the streets. I can tell you some of the bigger towns. I can tell you, you know, where Crane's Farm is and so on. But beyond that, I wouldn't be able to tell you if there's anywhere better or anywhere worse to build properties. I truly don't know. That would be something for the Memorandum of Understanding to go through. One of the things we did with ASLA, the Association of South Essex Local Authorities, is to make very clear, literally, I think it's bullet point 2, or might even be bullet point 1, is that each local authority keeps its sovereignty. So at the moment, with the 6 of us that are there for the 2 unitaries and the 4 districts, is that we have our say on us. So the other 5 can't gang up and say, let's all stick it in Thurrock, let's all stick it in Basildon or Rochford or Castle Point or wherever. Because we're staying in our local authority sizes. If we were to expand, obviously the number of houses we need to do would expand compared to Thurrock. Would it expand because it's a bigger local authority? No, it's just add the 2 together. Where would they go? Wherever the local plan would indicate they would need to go. Is Thurrock being seen as a cherry? Now we've got the Freeport status. You've got to remember the Freeport status is shared between us and Barking and Dagenham. So actually living proof that Thurrock really does look outside its borders. And will that be a cherry? Yes, I can guarantee it. There will be an awful lot of investment into both local authorities in the way of jobs, in the way of education, in the way of housing, in the way of infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I don't just mean roads and rail and everything else. I'm talking about doctors and schools and police stations and everything you need for bigger areas. Would a larger local authority, you know, a unitary authority, maximise on that? Yes, it would. Would that be seen by another local authority or even central government to say, actually, you need to cluster with this area to maximise the benefit of Freeport? I wouldn't have thought so, because the Freeport is there to maximise the benefit as the Freeport is at the moment. So it doesn't just maximise the benefit for Thurrock, it already maximises the benefit for South Essex and London and the surrounding areas, because not everything will be physically in Thurrock. Not everybody will live in Thurrock that will work there. They will travel there as they do now. There'll just be more people doing so, and they will need more roads and everything else. So there would be expense along with that cherry, shall we say.
Thanks, Rob. Can you guarantee that we won't have a sign saying Basrock anywhere in Thurrock?
There have been a few jokes along that lines at ASLA and elsewhere. I'm never, ever, ever going to suggest a name for a new local authority. If there was a new local authority, you know, I would hate to have it just something like South West Essex or South East Essex or something, because that just means nothing to anybody. There's no place to it. Basrock, there was an equally amusing one with ASLA, which would be Castle South Basrock, which did sound like some villain's den in Game of Thrones, but you know, the reality is it wouldn't be that. What it would be something for us to decide, and no, it wouldn't be council face either.
Councillor Rice.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, Rob. We've got 170,000 population now. Once we build our 32,000 homes, that will rise to over 300,000. You've mentioned the three ports, Tilbury, DP World and Ford. I would think we've got enough going to tell this government that we can stay on our own, because I can remember in '96 when Thurrock and Basildon was first muted, I was dead against it then, and quite frankly, I'd be dead against it now, because all I see is that Basildon will just assume Thurrock. I might be wrong on that, but I think we've got enough growth in this borough to convince the government that once we build them homes and expand our local plan and get our call for sites in, etc., we can be dynamic enough on our own, because we'll have the base. Because if you look at most London boroughs, they look for 300,000. It's the magical term. And we will approach that quite fast. So it sounds appealing, but I'd be inclined to let Basildon drift off, you know, wherever they want to drift off to. I would not want us to be part of them, because it just don't make sense. We've got so much going for ourselves. The new local plan coming, the 32,000 homes, generating that populace. We will have the base to be a strong unitary authority. And the last thing we want is confliction. And I think that's what Basildon will bring. But we will obviously wait and see.
Rob?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Gerald, for actually a really good question. And if anything, if there was ever a reason to have a memorandum of understanding, you just hit the nail on the head. A memorandum of understanding isn't just, okay, well, as of today, there's a snapshot. This is about what's going to happen in now, what's going to happen, say, in 3 years' time when it be finalised. Again, when I say finalised, if there was a plan that said it must happen, it would still, as we all know, local government works at a particular pace. I'm going to leave it there. And it may be 2 or 3 years before that happens. But what's it going to be like in 3 years' time? What's it going to be like in 5, 10, 15 years' time? And these are the things that we need to understand. We know there's housing numbers. We know there's growth numbers that need to be had. We know that Basildon's got its own local plan. We've got our own local plan. You know, there needs to be, well, where does this sit together? What's going to happen? Every local authority will be bigger in 15, 20, 30 years' time, because population will naturally grow. Housing areas will naturally grow. So everybody will be at 300,000 at some point, and then 500,000 at some point in the future, which is why numbers are not always the right thing. But you really hit really good reasons there for an MOU to establish what now, what in the future, medium term, what in the future, long term, but also, again, back to the status quo. Well, actually, is there any point in this at all? You know, is Thurrock going to become, you know, the king of South Essex, for want of a better term, and everybody looks to us as being, you know, the centre point for, training, industry, shipping, logistics, and media and art, and everything else? And actually, do we become, you know, the centre point for everything? You know, it's quite possible. We seem to punch way above our weight to start to look outside of the local authority and not just sort of looking insular. And it could well be that actually when we start looking outside, there is no real reason to do much more than what we're doing now and carry on. I would hope that there will be benefits for this. As we know, biggest tractor plant in Europe, I think, is in Basildon. You know, a huge amount of manufacturing in Basildon. Where do a lot of their parts come in? Literally line of sight from my house at Tilbury Docks at DP World. So would there be a natural reason to do it? Well, maybe. Does business see those pencil lines drawn on the map back in? I can't remember when the counters came in. Probably 18 something or 17 something or other. Do they see them? No, probably not. Will they operate over them? Yes, they will. Will they operate them if they're not there? Yes, they will. Will it, of course, be a benefit for them to go and then say, do you know what? We want to expand. To talk to the 2 local authorities and do the job twice. They do it once, they do everybody. Whether it be residents, whether it be children going through schools and getting education, the whole lot. But yeah, really the reasons you gave there are the reasons why, some of the reasons we need to be doing this MOU.
Great, thank you very much. I don't see any other hands raised. So that being the case, the recommendation at 1.1 is that we are happy that we have commented on the item this evening. Are we happy that we've done that?
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's agreed. Councillor Gledhill, just to thank you for attending this evening to present. I know the whole committee will have found that extremely useful and a really interesting discussion. And I know we'll watch the outcome here with interest, and I'm sure there will be, over a number of years, a lot of detail to get into. So thank you very much. You are welcome to attend, but if not, I completely understand that you want to drop off.
I would love to attend, but I've got 4 outstanding calls. But thank you very much for the opportunity to question, and thank you very much for your endorsement as to the way forward. With that, please enjoy the rest of your meeting whilst I attend to my calls. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Right, we'll move on then to item number 6, which is the communications update. And I think Karen is going to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report provides an update on developing the Council's new communication strategy, namely the health check that was carried out by the LGA and our action plan towards implementing their recommendations. We are inviting the committee's comments to further inform the strategy, which is on the work programme for the first meeting in the new municipal year. The LGA were invited by the Council to carry out the peer health check to inform the development of the strategy and the Council's approach to communications as they did in 2017. It's an opportunity for us to both get feedback from stakeholders, internal and external, via the independent peers rather than just via the communications team itself, but also for the peers to help us learn by providing examples of best practice elsewhere. The report highlights a number of positives. It recognises particular strengths in partnership working and crisis communications in terms of the Council's response to COVID, which was widely praised, but also in terms of how we've handled specific incidents with partners. The report states that the team is more flexible and responsive, and it's full of phrases such as hardworking, creative, proactive, and committed. Internal comms was seen as having substantially improved since 2017, and overall communications is more outward focused, campaign led, and we've been working hard to develop our own communication channels. Of course, there are areas for improvement, and we welcome the recommendations within the LGA's report. They cover both strategic issues to be considered as part of developing the strategy, but also some practical operational suggestions, many of which we've already been able to progress. The Who Reads What survey, which is something that the LGA have recommended, will provide us with valuable insight to inform the strategy, and work will be taking place over the coming weeks to develop the draft strategy itself. As I mentioned at the start, Chair, the committee were invited to comment on the report and the action plan and make any further suggestions to inform the drafting of the communications strategy. And both myself and Mary Patricia Flynn, who's the strategic lead for communications, are on the meeting and happy to answer the committee's questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Karen. And I'll just say first of all that I feel like this is a really good piece of work. I think it's really thorough, some really interesting details on the work of the team, and then some really good feedback, both positive in terms of the work of the team. And I think, as you called out, the work there around communication, particularly through the COVID period, I think is right to call out, but also some really constructive areas to focus on for improvement. So I think it's really good to see not report, but the draft response and action plan that we've got against that report as well. And I think really great to see some concrete next steps and where we plan to go with this, as well as, of course, the larger strategy that will come back to this committee in the fullness of time. I think that the piece that I will just pick up first, because it's one that this committee's had sort of quite a lot of interest in over 4 years, and obviously one of the areas where we've invited editors in previously is to understand the relationship between local media and the comms team. And again, I think I'd welcome a lot of the recommendations and suggested actions in the report. I think the points on speeding up responses, streamlining processes, and making sure that we can kind of clear through to maintain that those fast channels of communication are certainly welcome. I mean, my views, I think we should continue to emphasise that as a very important area for the comms team going forward. And I'd certainly say that we need to continue to look at how we can improve that process and continue to build a relationship with the local media. The bit I'd also welcome, I think, is what's called out as trying new approaches to how we engage. So, for example, the briefings. So I'm really interested in where we might go with that, and other kind of areas under consideration under that kind of umbrella of looking for new ways of working with the local media.
Thanks, Chair. Absolutely. I mean, we've seen some examples of other local authorities that are doing some online briefings for the local media. Often they can work well where perhaps there's a significant change to a service. And it's a good way of offering the local media the opportunity to almost do a Q&A and ask some questions in one go with service representatives and members, as well as simply issuing a press release that might result in a number of other questions. And I think one of the things we will want to do is also speak to the local media themselves again about ideas that they have, and obviously a number of the local media, BBC Essex is a good example, work with other local authorities close to us, what's working well from their perspective, and Mary Patricia may have other examples of that as well, but certainly something that we would want to explore going forward. And certainly with the increased use of technology during the COVID period, there are opportunities that present themselves as part of that as well.
Thank you. Mary Patricia, is there anything you wanted to add on your side as well?
Yeah, just to say, I think that, as Karen pointed out, the use of technology and the way that we've got more familiar with having online sessions and online briefings opens up a whole new world of opportunity, really. And I think looking as well at more use of video, both in the interactive sense and in the way of more clearly explaining things, I think that's going to be really useful. And I think anything that's interactive and provides a question and answer platform, it also helps with that immediacy, that if there are questions, that there is an opportunity to answer them straight away, and that there are no delays and hold-ups in that way. So I think that would be really useful, and it's something that I'm doing a piece of work on at the moment, looking into options around.
Thank you. Karen, one last question from me around the team. I think the report notes that we're around sort of 10 people or so in the wider team. Clearly, one of the things upcoming now is quite a severe budget challenge over the next few years. Do we expect any kind of changes to that team size, or is this one of the areas where we're really looking to sort of protect roles?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think as part of the work that we will have to do across the local authority, we'll be looking at all areas of activity. So it's not possible to say it absolutely wouldn't or it absolutely would be. Obviously, one of the key elements of the communications team would be communicating any changes, and particularly while we're still managing something like the COVID pandemic, absolutely critical to ensure that we're communicating directly with residents and getting the advice and guidance out to people directly. So there are no current plans to make changes at the moment. But as I said, in the longer term, and obviously we've got the financial update as part of the agenda this evening, we will have to look at all areas of the council's activity to ensure that they're as efficient as they can be going forward.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I guess the final call out I'll just make on that is, clearly we've got a lot of big decisions to come in terms of finances, but also that new comm strategy coming through. And I think it's just important that they are sort of aligned in terms of outlook. So we make sure that kind of what we say we're going to deliver is deliverable over the coming years, because the worst thing to do would be to pull a new strategy forward, and then sort of have to sort of take sort of changes in what the service could deliver sort of shortly after that. So I guess it's just making sure that that is that's well aligned.
If I can come back on
Yeah,
that, Joe, I think it builds really on the comments Mary Patricia and I were making previously. One of the benefits of digital technology, the use of kind of social media and digital channels, and obviously being mindful that we don't exclude any residents as part of that. It is more efficient and more immediate than historical kind of printed materials, and there are opportunities to do much more along those lines. And again, it's finding different ways of doing things and maximising those opportunities as we go forward, and that will absolutely be reflected in the comms strategy.
Yeah, thanks. Really good to hear. Really good to hear that as well. It's not just talking about staff; it's all of those other ways of making sure that we're working the comms process efficiently and effectively. I'll go across to Councillor Duffin next. Oh, sorry, Councillor, you're on mute.
My bad. I took my hand down rather than unmute myself. So I've got quite a few different questions, so it might be best to just throw stuff out there and then sort of deal with them one at a time. One is something I've always pushed the council on for 5 years since I've been elected. It's more positive stories. I think it should easily be a goal of every single day. Let's have a positive story. The world needs positive stories more than ever before, but there is so much good work the council does and then doesn't scream and shout about it. And then we wonder why residents go, no, the council, all they do is tax me and then occasionally miss bins. But more needs to be done to proactively get that out, and not just on social media, obviously to the other media outlets as well, because they do like talking about good stories, but when they only hear the bad stuff, it's not their fault that they end up writing about the bad stuff and missing the good stuff. And whether it's employee, it could be team of the week, because we don't want to mention particular employees on social media, but that's a really nice idea, just to, hey, every Friday, team of the week. Why is this team standing out more than anything else? There's a really good post the other day of it was 2 areas. I forget the street it was, but the work they've been done to tidy up. Stuff like that's great, because you've then got people posting under it. Hey, yeah, they've done a really good job down my road. They did this. People do want positive stuff, and it can be as simple as that. And that's not sort of a cleaning that one street. It's not life changing for anyone, but it makes people proud of their borough. So a massive push for more positive stories, because we can do it. There is good stuff going on. By all means, if it's a case of pushing portfolio holders to scream and shout about more, I'm happy to help with doing that. But no, can we get more positive stories?
Thanks. Who wants to field that one? Mary Patricia.
Thank you. Yeah, that example that you've used is a prime example of things that we think residents are interested in finding out about. And I think that the Who Reads What survey will really help us to kind of drill down into where people are actually getting their news and getting their information about the council from. And from that, we can then refine kind of what channels we're using to get different kinds of information out. You know, some things will be more appropriate for Facebook. Some things would make a nice Instagram story. Some things would make a really good press release and a really good media story. Some things might be better as a video. YouTube is a really popular channel within certain age groups. So it's thinking about, you know, what age group is going to interact with the council story that's actually done through the medium of video. So it's looking at, and that's what the comm strategy will be exploring, is looking at having the content on the right channels that will really engage residents and help to bring issues to life for them. I think, you know, the more examples we can give of actual work the council is doing and outcomes for residents. So it's not just, you know, this team is working really hard. It's what's the end impact on the residents? What can people see on their street or in their community or in their family? And I think that's a really critical role for the communications team, is helping residents to see what it is the council is all about, what we're doing for them. You know, why should they be involved in the council, and why should they engage with us through our various communications channels? They should, to find out what's good for them. They can find out what's happening in their local area. They can find out, you know, why they pay their council tax. What do they actually get for it? And bringing that to life for people. So yeah, that's definitely a key piece of work and something that we're trying to do a lot more with.
Thanks very much.
So the next part's just all around the engagement with the local media. I've always felt that, hey, 24 hours I think is reasonable, or 24 working hours, not weekends and stuff. I get stuff takes longer then, of just getting back to them. I understand there's odd requests that, hey, you might need more people to sign it off. It might be waiting on a portfolio holder that might be on holiday that week or something, and it might take slightly longer to get an answer on that. But then if the bar's always, hey, get back to these people in 24 hours, then when you go, hey, this one's going to take 48 hours, or this one might take 72 hours, it's massive and I need 4 different departments to get information, then when the bar is generally 24, you get a lot more leash with media outlets of going, hey, this one's going to take slightly longer. With some of the stuff that goes on social media, I don't know if it does all go out to the local media, but I think that's something we really miss out on. We go, hey, there's an issue down this road, let's put it on social media. There's people that might follow a different news site, they might follow BBC Essex, and it's getting that information out to all of that outlets. And it might be a case of speaking to these different media outlets and going, hey, we've got this list that when we put it on social media, we can email you. If you don't want it, we don't want to spam you and you miss a more important press release or something there. But that information, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to a resident whether they read it on our social media platform or they read it on a different media outlet. As long as we're getting that information out to them, it's making their lives better. And whether it's, there's the talks in the report about June looking at these sort of briefings. Is there any way we can expedite that and move that up and have sort of a format, whether it's sort of, hey, it's half an hour every week, this is the time it is, and then different weeks we might have the portfolio holder responsible, we might have the council leader, we might have Lynn Carpenter as CEO, or we might have different people coming. So it's not just the communications team they're talking to, almost like that there. I'm not expecting like a presidential style hours briefing when someone stood at a podium chatting to the audience and taking all these questions, but more and more engagement, because generally face to face it's easier. Stuff that might get sent in emails get confused and sort of the wrong end of the stick. That way it just makes it easier. And hey, it could be the case that councillors can come sort of see them, come to them. Might be you want to open it up to all portfolio holders and go, look, we're having these meetings, if you want to come then you're more than welcome, because they could be feeding stuff in and just answering those questions straight away. But looking at different models, because I think that helps.
Yeah, I think you had some really interesting points there. I think, and again, it kind of goes back to what way do people want to consume this information? Because like you say, if you have a list of media contacts you send all your kind of lengthy press releases to, they're probably not the same list that you're going to want to give a heads up to about some different issues. And I think there's a lot more of that now, with a lot of journalists kind of keeping an eye on different Facebook pages and getting their news from there as well. I think, and from Twitter as well. I mean, that's actually old hat now, that people get their news on Twitter rather than waiting to get a press release. So yeah, I think there's more modern ways of working and different methods that we can employ. I completely agree. We always want to get key information out to people as wide and far as we can. I think there's a really critical role for members in that too. I think that more that, members can help us to share information through your own channels. I know people are active in different Facebook groups or community groups, and, really valuable advocates and trusted voices within your own communities. And I think that the more tools that we can provide you with, especially if we look at things like the COVID response, and having those links into communities with that key critical information, I think the more that we can amplify that and the more channels that we can use, especially to get to those communities that don't necessarily want to interact with the council as an entity, but are quite keen to hear from people within their own community about issues and about things that affect them. I think all of that is really, really valuable. And I think, again, this is really good feedback, really good, interesting discussion that we can help to inform that strategy piece.
Yeah, no, I think it's certainly, you could open it up to councillors and, hey, we're going to send out all this information. Do you want to be on these sort of mailing lists? And then by all means, there's no harm adding them on, because, yeah, we can be not media mouthpieces, but we can go, actually, this piece of information about this road is really important to my ward. I'm going to make sure I share this into a certain Facebook group or tell certain residents. They might have a mailing list. That sort of information we can pass out. So I think it's certainly something we can do. And videos you mentioned, I think it's really important to get involved in videos. You can keep them really short. You don't need 5-10 minute videos. quite frankly, at half time, if it's over 59 seconds, it ain't getting watched. They'll watch the first 59 seconds, or they'll check the time it starts, and it's like, oh, it's over 1 minute, I'm on to something else. So even if it's breaking it up in small bits, but it's really useful stuff. And we're here, it doesn't just have to be, hey, this committee meets every 2 months. We'll sit on it and we'll discuss it at a later point. We're all here to try and improve the council. So if it is a case of, hey, we want to get in touch, we want a workshop, invite the committee. I don't know if we're technically allowed, but it's the sort of thing that we could all jump on a meet or something and throw some ideas out. It doesn't have to be, hey, we'll wait until the next time committee's there, because we've all got ideas and we want to see it better. And there is room to grow. There is good stuff going on, but at the same time, let's fix some of this stuff, because it's stuff that's been discussed for, hey, 3-4 years. And it's like, let's start really getting some wins in here. And the more information and good news we can put out, the better. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks very much. I'm on to Councillor Ralph.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to lower my hand. It's a shame we're in lockdown, because I feel like having thrown a party when I read this report. I think it's brilliant. As Karen knows, she faced my frustration in our COVID meetings that I wanted videos to be put out, and local people speaking and officers talking about the stats, because we was getting good news, and it was the slowness of how we can communicate that with the rest of Thurrock, how well we were doing in bringing down numbers and protecting our care staff and everything. So seeing this report and the idea of using social media more, I just think it's brilliant. No, I do use social media. I've used it for years, been able to do some fantastic things with social media. And so, yeah, when I was elected, I was very frustrated by the slowness of press coming out of Thurrock Council. We were doing some great things and we weren't shouting about it. There'd be an email go out or a press release went to a local news outlet and it wasn't always picked up. And if we manage our own media and push it out there, people will listen to us. Now, there's questions that happen all the time from local residents. And if we're on top of that and we answer them quickly, they don't become bad news stories. They become a success story because we've been able to solve them quickly. I agree with Councillor Duffing with the turnaround of press questions. I'm really glad we can work on that and speed that up. I do like the idea of the deadline times. I think that's almost like a must now. We are living in a fast reaction world where people don't like sitting there waiting for information. They do think that we'll believe to sit there and can just get it immediately. Social media is that sort of a beast of feeding on information. Just coming back to one of the chair's comments regarding budgets and funding, and I think as the officers have said, social media is cheap. It's learning to use it well and the experience that comes from using it well. Being able to reach out to millions of people very, very quickly with social media doesn't cost anything, but the skill is in knowing what to put out there, and that is where these two are going to work. Are going to be worth their weight in gold. So it's that. But the idea of the videos and all that, I think, is spot on. Getting out of there faster. I do think that this is not a cost-saving exercise. I think that with use of the budgets that are going to be available, it could be really beneficial, and residents are going to get so much more information about what we do as a council. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Haigh.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think colleagues have said most of the things I was going to say. Actually, main thing I was focusing on really was about the use of modern methods of communication and digital in particular. And when I first read about the Who Reads What work there, I was thinking, lots of people these days either they don't necessarily follow the media and they don't necessarily trust the media, and also the media often got very little time to put in all the good news stories that's talked about. They're kind of less journalists actually on the news desks and things these days. So I was just very pleased to see that you've actually broadened out that Who Reads What into actually could be local community groups. People get information from those sort of sources as well. So if it's covering all those bases, I think that's absolutely right, because we shouldn't be necessarily relying on the media to take our message to the audience. I think, if people go to forum sites for their local news, that's where we need to get our messaging out. So I think it's just really important to make sure we just don't rely on kind of traditional ways of getting the message out through the media, because often it can be distorted, or there's the time issues, or they're not going to pick up all the stories we want them to run because they just don't see it as a priority, really. But we can get our own news directly to the audience if we actually really understand how people locally get their news. So I was kind of pleased to hear that's the approach you're taking. That's the only comment, really. I think generally it's very proactive, and at the end of the day, I take on Councillor Duffin's comments about getting good news out there, but you don't be carpet bombing people either, because people are only interested in the council to the degree that it impacts on their quality of their life, their street, their road, their children, etc. really. And we're all very much in the bubble, I guess, as councillors and whatnot. But I think it's a balance of what goes out as well. It's actually meaningful to people, as well as making sure we get the information done through the right channels. So it's not a question, just really an observation. So anyway, good report though, so thanks for that.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Councillor Ralph, did you want to come back in again on?
Yes. So thank you, Chair. I was just going to ask Karen something. The Who Reads What survey. Obviously, we know our problems with getting our responses from surveys. So one of the first things is trying to get more people to read that. I just wonder how are we going to have a new approach to it? Are we going to use social media to see who reads what? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ralph. Actually, yeah, that's something we've been looking at, and obviously we have our own portal and a number of communication channels. But actually, one of the things we're considering is whether we use a specialist market research company, as we have done for some previous surveys. So actually, you make sure that you get a good representation of obviously different age ranges, different backgrounds from different groups and different locations across the borough as well. And one way of doing that is actually commissioning somebody independently to run that survey on the council's behalf, to make sure that you get the numbers, but the numbers reflect and are representative of the wider Thurrock population, as opposed to just people who may be interested in that topic. So that's something we're considering at the moment. It's a really good point, and it the feedback will be really valuable in terms of how people find the council's website, as an example. We know who are opening and reading the e-newsletter, but actually what is the feedback on some of that content. And as Mary Patricia said, that there's a place for all of those channels. Absolutely, including the local media. And if we had more insight into that from the residents themselves, that will absolutely shape that positively going forward. But we absolutely need to make sure that we get the right level and distribution, for want of a better word, of response from Thurrock's residents. Yeah, really good point.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I don't think there are any other questions, so just thanks to Karen and Mary Patricia for presenting tonight and answering questions. I think members are really keen to see where we go to next, and I think sort of really looking forward to the strategy coming back in a future meeting as well. So really be great to see that action plan progressing. So thank you very much for that. Again, the recommendations ask us to note and comment, and I believe we've done that. So is everyone happy that we have?
Great.
Yeah, thank you. We'll move on then to item number 8, financial update, and I think Sean Clark. Oh no, sorry, I've missed one there. We've got item 7 first of all, the Q3 corporate performance report. Karen, over to you again.
Thank you. I thought you might have heard enough of me, and so you were skipping past the performance item. Thank you, Chair. This is the Q3 performance report. So it covers the period April to December 2020. The report shows that 2/3, so 66% of the indicators are achieving their target, and just over half are performing better or the same as in the previous year. Q3 presents a similar picture to the one the committee would have seen in Q1, which coincided with a period of national lockdown and significant restrictions. So we saw some performance improvement during Q2 when the restrictions eased, so in the previous report. And obviously, as we saw the positivity rate increase going into the autumn and winter, that has again impacted on our service delivery. And we would obviously expect that to continue into Q4, following the national lockdown since January. We've set out in the body of the report those indicators that have been directly or indirectly impacted by the coronavirus pandemic, and provided that commentary, as well as where we're able to a route to green. I think, as we discussed on the meeting when we were looking at Q1, less a reflection of performance and more a picture of the circumstances a number of services find themselves in. Hopefully the information within the report is useful for members, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Karen. And I think, look, I'm the first to jump in and say that we've got to have better performance where we are underperforming. But I think it's clear to see kind of the impact that COVID is having on delivery of KPIs in this case. So I don't want to be overly critical in terms of where we are. The one question that I was going to raise is on fixed penalty notices. And I just noticed that the performance there does seem fairly low at the moment. And I think while that's understandable, and while we are kind of currently being fairly lenient, so it's on page 57 if you want the reference there, while we are being kind of fairly lenient with personal circumstances, understandably at the moment, I guess the question is when do we start to shift into a more normal mode of enforcement?
Thank you, Chair. That's been kept under review, and I think now that we have had the publication of the government's roadmap, we're in a position to start to look at not just the KPIs, but services more broadly in terms of how they align to the roadmap, and therefore when we might be able to make some further changes and decisions around that. I think that's a really good question, and one we can pick up and perhaps feedback as part of the end of year Q4 report, where although we may not have seen an improvement during that period, we might be able to be clearer about the timescales aligned to the roadmap as we come out of that. And I think that indicator is just one example where hopefully now we will be able to make some decisions and give some consideration to the timing and when we would look to reinstate some of those processes. And as I say, I think it applies to a number of other areas as well. And this is just one example of that, and certainly happy to kind of take that away and bring that back.
Yeah, thanks. Makes sense. Councillor Ralph.
Sorry, you caught me on the hop there. I was just reading the bit that you pointed out. Sorry. It's actually, I understand also there's been a massive impact of COVID during this report. And, you know, if we look at things like the rent collections and all that, and we can understand why that has come down as low as it has. There's just one point I did want to pick up, and that was on the number of placements available within the Council for Volunteers on page 53. Although it was actually achieved, it's also still sort of lower. I wondered how that classified as volunteers of placements. I was just aware that obviously during COVID we had a lot of access to volunteers that were coming forward. Was this for roles that they were going to be placed specifically in the council to move forward?
I think the short answer, Councillor Ralph, is I'm not sure. And it's the number of placements available within Council for Volunteers, isn't it, on page 53?
Yeah.
Just checking.
So it was 205, then it's 230.
230, then 223.
Travel was worse, but we were still going up. I was just expecting a big bowl of them.
I think some of that will be reflective of some of the service changes. So certainly we've seen obviously some elements of our own service provision close. So as an example, when we had to close the libraries in the first lockdown, members of staff that were working in the libraries were redeployed to support things like the Thurrock Coronavirus Action Group and used to fulfil other absolutely critical roles. So I imagine that some of those placements, and I'll take this away and get a fuller response that I can share with the committee, will be reflective of how some of the services have had to change and adapt to COVID. So some of the things we might ordinarily have been able to offer, we've not been able to at this time. But as I say, happy to get you a fuller answer. But yes, I think still positive that we've been able to hit that target during that time, as you say.
Yeah, that's been brilliant. Thank you for the report. It's a very good report.
Thanks very much. And if there aren't any other comments or questions, then recommendations at 1.1 are again that we note and comment performance. I'm happy that we've done that. Yeah, that's noted. Thank you very much again, Karen. Then we'll move on to item number 8, financial update, and this time it is Sean to take us through.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is the final update of this municipal year for you. It largely reflects everything that we've spoken about in previous reports as well, Chair. So there should be no surprises there. As a reminder to everybody on this committee, corporate ONS has the overall remit for the entire budget, but any specifics that are in there relating to other services would normally be looked at by that particular ONS committee. Having said that, I'll take you to the table at section 4 of the report, which shows you the various different variances within the services that we hold this year. And also has separated out the impact of COVID within that report as well. So about 3/4 of the way down, you can see that COVID costs have been in the region of about 17 million, and these are set out further in the report, so you can see the types of area and activity that has been through, but that is a mix of both increased expenditure and especially around social care and resilience, but also through losses of income. As a direct result. So when we look at the theatre, Grange Waters, etc. We've received 14.2 million in general government grant. And again, this committee's received updates on all of the various different grants that have been announced over the last year. But we've also received just over 2 million through both the furlough scheme and through the income compensation scheme as well. That still does leave us a net cost of 656,000 relating to COVID. In addition, though, you can see above that line in the final column other variances. There are a number of small underspends, surpluses, if you like, in services, but there are 2 areas that jump out as also having created non-COVID related impacts. The first one of those is around children's services, which are mainly around the cost of placements and increasing placements. And the other one is one that we've reported to this committee and to Standards and Audit quite regularly in recent months as well, which was the pause the investment strategy. So this is removing the targets. This is not a reduction in the investments we currently hold, but removing the targets that had been in place for this year and previous year as well for and for Thurrock Regeneration Limited. Overall, though, we started the year with a £4 million surplus, and they're the figures that you see down on that bottom right-hand corner. And we are projecting at the moment that we should just about break even because of that surplus that we budgeted at the beginning of the year. So this is very much an overview, although there's a lot of detail in this report. As I say, most of those will be service-specific, Chair. But it's just to give you that indication that we think we've come through this year on a break-even position. But this is why we've also wiped out any surpluses carrying forward, which added to the pressures into next year. And I'm happy to try and take any questions on that, Chair.
Thanks very much, Sean. As ever, really comprehensive update. I feel like committee are probably fairly familiar with the majority of these numbers now, having reviewed them on quite a regular basis this year. And certainly there are some elements that I don't propose to get into the detail on, like the investment approach, because I think we've again debated that at length over the course of this last year. The one bit in here that I think is new for me in terms of some of the service level detail is obviously the forecast outturn by service. And I think it's really good to understand across the piece kind of where those pressures are and where we are under an overspending. And the one that really caught my eye on page 73 was children's services. Clearly, there's an 851,000 or so overspend overall, and then within children and family services, about 1.5 million overspend. So quite big numbers there. With a lot of that being driven by placement costs and quite big variance from within the placement totals. Now, clearly, in terms of the detail of the service delivery, that's the children's ONS to sort of get into the detail on. But from a financial perspective, I'd quite like to understand how well managed that spend is. Clearly, we can see that external fostering, external residential placements are really big drivers. So the latter of those, for example, accounting for something like 4.7 million on 25 children. So some very high cost placements. We know those placements can be very expensive, and a lot of the time that is required. But I guess I'd like to see a level of assurance that we're getting best value for money as well as the good quality for our money in terms of the service for Thurrock children.
Thanks, Chair. So very much a summary response to that. It is something which is being regularly challenged from both within and from outside of the service. So if I just talk about from the finance section itself, we've actually strengthened the numbers and the seniority around children's services to provide that check and challenge, and they work very closely with the service around those particular placements as well. We've also been working through procurement as well to check and challenge around, again, the value for money aspects, if you like, from within there, and how we might be able to actually procure those services cheaper. From within the services as well, there are weekly placement meetings chaired by very senior officers, which create that check and challenge and continually review the placements that are already in place, as well as any new ones coming forward. On a regular basis as well, there are independent reviewing officers from within children's services, but outside of those areas as well, which go through and check and challenge again all of those sides of things too. And then again, the corporate director for children's services as well takes very much a hands-on approach in reviewing a number of those, especially the high-cost placements, to try and make sure that we do achieve exactly what you were just asking about, Chair, in terms of that value for money. So there is a huge amount of work that goes into it. In addition, and Karen's actually still on the call, but the drives, etc., to be able to get Thurrock foster carers and so on as well as in terms of those campaigns where the local fosterers themselves are greater value, if you like, than the external independent fostering agencies. So that's very much a drive about being able to recruit and attract far more foster carers.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate the detailed response there. The last question I just wanted to pick up on the same page at 6.5 was the note that the number of agency staff is now 30 FTE as of December. I guess what that makes me just want to check in, and that's just an example, but obviously in terms of the recruitment freeze that we've got in place, we kind of want to make sure that that's working to reduce spend, and that's not just leading to agency staff coming on to cover some of those roles. So again, I guess it's just a bit of assurance here that we're not seeing that freeze on recruitment leading to agency staff kind of coming in to fill those to fill that activity, and that we are kind of not shooting ourselves in the foot through that kind of recruitment freeze. Does that make sense?
It does, and yeah, a number of responses to that to try and reassure you. Actually, the 90% of those posts that are still actually being agreed are probably in children's social care, certainly children's and adult social care. Very few posts are actually being let through other than that. So there's not so much a recruitment freeze on children's social workers. Historically, children's social workers have always had a high level of agency. I think 30 is actually a reduction, and that's been part of the good work being done by the service along with HR colleagues to actually reduce that down. So that is less. In terms of the direct question about the savings of 4 million that's in the budget for next year through vacant posts, that is being measured from the overall salary estimates at a gross level against both salaries and agency costs. So they will be combined. It's not just going to look at one line. We're looking at that 4 million from vacant post savings comes out of the entire employee budget, whether it be salaries or whether it be agency. So I received the figures for 11 months today, and we are absolutely on track to be able to deliver that still, even with the levels of agency that we still have. We're forecasting maybe around 7 to 7.5 million in agency costs this year. It wasn't that long ago we were spending 11 or 12 million a year, just to show you that direction of travel.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate the answer. Do any other members want to come in on this item? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sean, for that update. Again, at recommendation 1.1 is that we have commented on it. Are we satisfied that we have? Yeah. Thank you very much. I'll move on then to item number 9, which is asset disposal. And again, I think, Sean, you're going to introduce this one.
Thank you, Chair. So I brought this one forward. It wasn't originally on the work plan, but when we talked about the budget on the 21st of January meeting, the point was raised in relation to capital receipts that no Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I think, or wider membership had actually seen anything around the disposals. Most councillors will remember, I'm sure, that from 2016, the idea of the 3 Rs was introduced, and certainly reviews started back then, but I think we can all say that it hasn't taken it hasn't moved on as quickly and effectively as it should have been, and certainly not in the last couple of years. So we've brought forward a review now of all of the assets that we hold. That is still ongoing, but largely we're categorising those into 3 types for officers at the moment. That is operational assets. So by definition, that's any asset which is being used to deliver a service direct to the community. So that can range from children's centres through to the hubs and libraries through to the civic offices. There are then community assets. A lot of those will be village halls, as you can imagine, etc. as well. And then there's the third category, which are basically those assets which don't fall into either of those first 2. And they're the ones we're actually reviewing quite considerably as well. We will be looking at a piece of work over the coming months, and that'll be one of the budget items that we bring forward as a review of all of the operational assets, about how we use them and so on. Do we need as many centres as we've got, etc. So we'll bring a further report on that at some point. Community assets we will look at separately. There's quite a lot in here about how we work with the community, etc. And there's obviously a lot of legislation around that as well. And then the third aspect, though, is where we have surplus land or buildings, which is not contributing to the delivery of services. And this is basically starting a strategy as to the sort of things that would be considered before bringing those forward. What we've also pointed out in there is that it's been practiced, but I'm not sure where it's been written down before, that obviously ward members will be informed of any disposals that will be coming forward in their area before such time as that disposal takes place. We've brought forward 9 assets in the first instance. These have largely been driven from people who are already resident in those particular sites that have always shown an interest of wanting to be able to purchase them, or have been certainly in more recent times. And there is another one, which was Dell Road, Orsett, which is in there, which had been a previously agreed disposal, which then fell through with a particular housing association. And so that one's rolled forward again. And rather than, even though we had the decision, wanted to bring that forward again for transparency purposes. I think coming forward, the change to the Constitution a couple of years ago now, 18 months or so ago, removed any delegation from officers in being able to dispose. So anything up to 200,000 is now a leader decision. Anything over that is a cabinet decision. We're likely to be bringing properties forward in tranches over coming months and years. So I think most of those will therefore be seen by cabinet. And so there will be that transparency coming through. Somewhere we rely on, where we rely on operational assets as well, that will be considered as part of the wider budget process in terms of how services will be delivered, what services will be delivered, etc. And again, will probably be seen by the relevant ONS before any decision by cabinet. So hopefully we'll see a very much a transparent process coming forward, and a lot more sight for members. I think that's as much as I wanted to say at the moment, Chair.
Thanks very much, Sean. My first question was going to be about resident and member engagement, and I think you kind of preempted that well in terms of the comments on the involvement of ONS, the involvement of Cabinet, and briefing of ward members about any pieces of land or assets that are going to go through the process. So I certainly welcome that. I guess in relation to the kind of the piece that we've heard on comms earlier, I guess the one piece I'd add to that is I think it's really important just to be open kind of publicly with this as well, and I'd certainly welcome the fact that I'd certainly welcome if we were able to say that we would, as part of that kind of comms approach, make sure that we were communicating out to residents to let them know when particular pieces of land were being considered, were being kind of put up for disposal. I think that'd be a very welcome step forward, and that'd be great if we could pick that up as part of the wider comms work. But the sort of next question then was around local amenities such as parks and land such as that residents sort of will feel particularly close to. And I guess, again, residents would want to have that confidence that assets or land like local parks that they will sort of enjoy in their local communities will be kind of genuinely and kind of fully protected through this policy. And I just hope we can give them that reassurance.
Chair, I think any asset that comes forward will have to go through the various or relevant consultation that's specific to that. I mean, parks are normally protected in one way, shape, or form. I'm looking to see if Ian nods at me there, but we can't go and just dispose of those particular assets without quite considerable due process. So I think I can not guarantee. I can never guarantee anything. But certainly there would be considerable channels to have to go through if we were to be doing that. This is mainly going to focus, I think, in those three areas that I spoke about earlier, where we're talking about land and buildings which are not being used for any form of service delivery, which are therefore surplus to requirements and are probably still costing us money in actually holding them. It's going to be around rationalising our operational estate. And then that third stream, which is probably more relevant to part of what you're talking about there, which are those ones which are community assets, and what best to do with community assets going forward, and especially with the state of repair of some of those assets as well.
Thanks, Sean. Councillor Ralph.
Thank you, Sean. I welcome this, and I welcome that you brought it to scrutiny. I think following this, we won't see things like the Stamford Sandpit car park happening again. You know, where the value tests and the market price will be looked at. going through on this is the surplus test. You spoke about parks, community parks. In the legal terms, what classifies as a park and a green space? I'm just aware of that in the past, when there was a danger of losing some part of land, was any value to our community? Did it enhance anything? And we had to prove evidence that it was a part of a health environment where we end up putting a trim track up there to safeguard the land. So where does that barrier line with what is a green space and what is a park? Does it have to have equipment on it to be classified as that, or can it be seen as underused just because we only have 50 people walk their dog on it a day? Where do we see that barrier put in?
That's one I'm definitely going to have to take away with me. I absolutely can't answer that one. But in terms of being able to spell out those categories, I think anything that we do bring forward as well will be very, very clear about how it's defined. And again, depending on that, will also then depend on whether there is, what level of consultation is going to be required as well to be able to do that. So that will inform that protection, if you like, from that aspect. But in terms of the difference between just green space and a park, I'm afraid I can't answer that one. But I'll look to get an answer to that one and send that out if I can, with the response that Councillor Rice pointed out earlier.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Sean. That's appreciated. And I think sort of with sort of two of us having spoken about it, I think I know you're kind of looking for feedback on the general approach. Regardless of kind of the individual designation question, I think the committee is probably clear that one piece of feedback from us would clearly be about making sure that residents are confident in protections that are available for local parks and green spaces, and clearly that that we have adequate guarantees for them that we can't simply go in and take over those spaces. And I think that's always certainly a question that I get as a local councillor, and I'm sure that others do as well in their wards. And I think if we can give one piece of feedback tonight, I think it would be to make sure that we have a really high level of protection for those types of spaces and communities. Are there any other comments that members want to come in with here as well? No? Okay, thank you very much then. Thanks, Sean, for the introduction to that piece. The recommendation at 1.1 again is that we comment, and the members happy that we've done that?
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you very much. That takes us on to item 10 then, which is the work programme. Lucy, I guess we're into the stage now where we are starting to push things into the next municipal year. One comment from me that I'd like to see just added to the committee's work programme for next year is, again, a sort of follow-on piece from something that we heard, I think it was earlier this year, looking at ways of working, and in particular looking at remote ways of working across the council. So I'm very interested in what we as a council, both members and officers, can learn from the process that we've had to use over the last year, what we can learn, what we can take forward, and clearly what policy context that we're working in terms of what we are and aren't able to continue doing. I think it would be good to make sure that if there are positives, we take them on. So it'd be good to see that added. Councillor Duffin?
Yeah, just on the comm strategy, there was like loads of different targets for different months. It might be one just not a full report necessarily, but like we can just monitor that update and say, hey, there was 3 things meant to be done by this point. How are we doing with those 3? Yeah, we obviously don't want to go into the whole thing every single report, but maybe across the year, just, hey, let's look at this update of these were the 3 targets to have done by this time. How are we doing on those? Could we tweak them, look at improvements?
Brilliant, thanks very much.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to comment. I think that's a really helpful suggestion. And if we bring an update back as part of the comm strategy item initially in June, and then we can reflect on the timing of an update, even if it's a verbal update that's linked to my attendance as part of presenting the performance report. Really happy to do that.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Sean?
Thanks, Chair. I'm still looking at dates and the approach really, but you'll remember from the budget meeting in January there that I said that we would need to be bringing forward ideas this side of any summer recess about the approach for the 22-23 budget. And so how that's going to fit in with timescales around cabinet and so on around the June-July time. So I think certainly June would have a financial update as well, but it may be that we're going to need to look at other timings of meetings around then and whether an additional one's going to be required.
Thanks, Sean. That sounds good. Brilliant. I think we have all of those amends. So I think finally, I just think in closing the meeting, then I'll just say that obviously this is my last meeting as chair of corporate ONS and on Thurrock Council. So I'd just like to say thanks to all of those officers that have supported the work of the committee, and in particular Lucy for all of her hard work and input and a huge amount that she's done behind the scenes, both on the general work of the committee, but also on the scrutiny review as well, which was, I think, a really impactful piece of work. So, Lucy, thank you so much for all of your work. And just to thank all members of the committee as well for your contributions this year. I think we've had some excellent debates and some really good outputs from the committee, and very happy with, I think, how we've worked together as a group this year. And last word from Councillor Duffin.
Yeah, are you not coming back at all? No election, or is it election depending?
No, not coming back at all. I must admit, it's a year late. I was expecting it to be last year, but I had a full start. So
No, I just want to say thank you very much, because I think it's 4 years probably on the bounce that you've been the chair and I've been the deputy. So yeah, it's been really, really good, and we've accomplished a lot, and there's more to do moving forward. Fingers crossed I'm back, else I'll be retired like you from the politics. So we'll see.
Thanks very much, and I'll second that. And just good luck to all of those members that are seeking to be elected again in the May elections. Hopefully, those May elections will actually take place this time. I think it was about this time of year last year when we all got the news that we'd be carrying on for another year. But with that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you to all members. Have a good evening, and yeah, best of luck.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Night.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah.